were Shirley MacLaine, Russ Tamblyn, Alan Arkin, and Louise Fletcher. And most of you are going, well, I don't really know who they are, but that's all right. Some of you do. The average income was $3,125 in the theaters, and I'm sure Howard saw some of these movies. Viva Villa, The Black Cat, Tarzan and His Mate, where Jane was inappropriately dressed, Forsaking All Others, and Wonder Bar. Now, I only know about a couple of those movies. The 1930s styles, women wore high-waisted sailor pants and Oxford shoes, and men wore the flat cap, sport coat, and they had broad shoulders in the sport coats. Some of the 1930s slang, giggle juice. What do you think that was? And alcohol. And blow your wig. That's when you're really excited. A grifter, of course, we all know what a grifter is. Con man. Clam bake. You know what that is? That's a fun time. And slip me a 5. Shake hands. Has anybody ever heard of any of these? You know, of course, I realize, it's 90 years later. But never heard of it. Popular names were Mary, Betty, Barbara, Shirley, and Dorothy. And for men, Robert, James, John, William, and Richard. So there's 2 names in there that I like. On the radio, you could listen to Cocktails for Two by Duke Ellington. I Only Have Eyes for You by Ben Shahn. Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, a lot of us know that one. The Very Thought of You, that's another familiar tune. Love and Bloom, I'm not familiar with that. The Stars Fell on Alabama. Scratching my head on that one. And The Little Dutch Mill, Bing Crosby sang that. The world population was 2.17 billion. U.S. population was 126 million. The average cost for stuff, new house was $5,970. A new car, $615, which I believe Howard bought a 1934 Chevy.
Well, 300, I think it was.
Yeah, and a gallon of gas, 10 cents. A gallon of milk was a lot more costly, 42 cents. And you get into the movie for 23 cents. But it was probably cheaper depending on where you live. In the news, the Apollo Theater held its first amateur night. John Herbert Dillinger, Public Enemy #1, he died in the shootout in Chicago. And the same thing happened to Bonnie and Clyde over in Louisiana, in Black Lake, Louisiana. And here's a very important statistic. The second highest wind gust ever recorded was a 231 mile per hour gust at the summit of Mount Washington in New Hampshire. So that's some of the stuff that we're dealing with, but some of the things that happened. But right here for now, it's Robert E. Howard Days, and the theme this year is Robert E. Howard in 1934. What was going on with Howard? What was he doing? What was he writing? What were the events that he partook of? All the good stuff. Well, these 3 gentlemen right here are going to have all the answers that you need. Yeah, or something. We have from the left we have Patrice Lunet.
1, 2.
1, 2. Yeah. And the French guy.
In the center we have Jason Carney, and over here we have Charles Hoffman, Chuck Hoffman to his friends, and Mr. Hoffman has the unique distinction of being here at Howard Days 2024. It is the 50th anniversary of his benchmark essay. Actually, well, I'm going to let you talk about it too. But Chuck he wrote what is considered the very first scholarly essay on Robert E. Howard, Conan the Existentialist. And because of that essay, people started to look at Howard differently as far as being a subject of criticism, literary criticism. And I'll let him tell you more about that, but I guess we're all ready to get started. So good, thank you very much.
I would like to begin with saying that I read Conan the Existentialist in, I guess, 1987 or something, a long time ago. And before that, I was just reading Howard for enjoyment. I knew there was something in there, but I couldn't figure out why. And one day I read this essay and it changed everything for me, and I'm honored today to be in the same panel with you. Chuck, thank you.
You're welcome.
I second that. I'm honored to be here on the same panel with Chuck Hoffman, author of Conan the Executions.
Well, thank you.
Okay, I guess we're done. If you have any questions?
I think we need a moderator.
Yeah.
Should I? Do you want to?
I have a question.
Okay.
No, I'm just joking, but does anyone want to moderate this one?
What happened to Shanks?
Oh, he bailed.
Can I ask Chuck a question?
Yeah, sure.
What prompted you to write the essay? I'm really curious. I mean, to everybody, what prompted you to write the essay?
Okay, the way it came about was I was in college at the time, and I majored in English, and we didn't declare minors, but I took a course in philosophy every semester because I liked the instructor, and that's where I learned about existentialism. And I just noticed, well, I see a lot of this in Howard, but it's something that hadn't been noticed heretofore because most academics didn't really come from the working and lower classes, so they weren't all that familiar with popular fiction. But I happen to see like a lot of these themes. Lovecraft as well, they could both be considered early existential writers because they dealt with basically the absurd aspect of existence, how you really have to create some sort of meaning for yourself. And I just noticed Conan's I describe as the consummate self-determining man, in a hostile world. So, I wrote that, and it got noticed by these guys at Harvard, and they had this magazine at the time. It was like a Harvard publication. It was called Crimmers, and it was about popular fiction and popular art. And they said, "Yeah, can we use an expanded, version of your essay? And would you talk about Edgar Rice Burroughs a little bit and so on?" And so I updated it. And that's the one that's usually been reprinted. I mean, the first version I wrote, it's never been reprinted. But anyway, the guys at Harvard say they sent me another note and said hey, we're not going to use that in Crimmers. We're starting our own magazine called REL. Can we use it instead? And they're, oh yeah, sure. And I thought, well, that'll never come out. And then later on, I happened to be in one of the very first comic book stores in the United States. It was over by Greg Ide in Etna, Pennsylvania, and he later moved to a bigger location in Pittsburgh, and there I saw it. And it was really good. For one thing, it has this really great interview with Frank Frazetta in it as well, where he talks about painting, the early Conan covers, and he actually described what it felt like to do that, and he said he felt like there was this electric current flowing down his arm through the paintbrush and onto the canvas. I don't know if that answers anything.
Thank you. Chris?
I'm going to step in for Jeff Shanks. My name is Chris Gruber. I'll help the panel move along. I think I really want to hear more about this later for sure, what you described. I think today we're going to talk a little bit about Robert E. Howard in 1934. I'm going to throw it out to the panel, just a general question. What was Robert E. Howard doing in his daily life in 1934? And then we can follow it up with the kind of things that he was writing. And then we can talk, I think we can even weave in any relationships that are of significance in that year, okay?
That was probably his best year from a professional viewpoint. He had 10 stories, 10 issues in Weird Tales out of 12 that year, including 5 covers, I think. And that's also the year when he started dating Novaline Price. So that was a very good year for him. I guess his best year, really.
And that's clearly significant. Most people here probably know who Nowlin is. Do either of you want to kind of give her an introduction to the crowd that may not know who Nowlin is?
So Novaline Price came to Cross Plains in August 1934, and she started teaching here. And very soon after, she and Bob started dating. I mean, very soon. She was interested in the guy because he was a writer. So of course, Bob sees this woman and she's interested in him. So obviously, he made things happen. And that was the beginning of a beautiful and later stormy relationship.
Oh, and not long after 1934, we had this wonderful year. Doesn't he starts to take himself seriously as a professional writer. He gets an agent. He starts thinking about different genres because Weird Tales isn't paying him. So I think one way of thinking about 1934 is when Howard is becoming very confident as a writer.
Oh, absolutely. That's also the year when, on top of what you just said, he also inquired as to the possibility of having his stories published in England. So he was getting his rights back from Weird Tales. So he got the rights back in, I think, April, if memory serves, for 9 stories. That's when he was trying to publish something in England, and that eventually became The Howard Dragon.
Oh, that's my favorite Conan too. What was the significant, what single story was the turning point that you just mentioned with regard to him taking himself seriously as a writer? What was the story that prompted him to feel that way?
I don't know. I'd have to speculate about that. I mean, the Valley of the Worm is very literary. I mean, it's musical. I read it and I think this is a writer who's confident in themselves, who are they've discovered their voice. I mean, that's just I'm speculating, but I'm not sure in letters if he said this is where I've actually become Robert E. Howard the writer. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's true to some extent. I would say that A Witch Shall Be Born is the one where he exudes confidence, really, because it's a Conan story and Conan is there for 2 chapters out of 5. We have the crucifixion scene, so he's really there. And he says, okay, I can do whatever I want.
What kind of mindset was he in his personal life through the letters at that time? Anything that might stick out as in adding to his writing? Any elements?
The correspondence with Lovecraft. That's when he starts, reaping Lovecraft. He was just, okay, your friend Mussolini and stuff like that. He was getting very confident.
So at this point, he had moved beyond the Mr. Lovecraft phase, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It was not Dear Mr. Lovecraft.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
What, 1934? Well, if you were able to travel back in time to meet Robert E. Howard, that'd be the year to do it. Because for one thing, okay, he's 28 years old, which is like a fantastic age to be. It was before the darkness really started to gather, where he had, troubles with Novelin and, big trouble with Farnsworth Wright. His income had like taken a hit in 1933 because of the Depression, but in 1934 he was like starting to come back economically. There were 4 Conan cover paintings on Weird Tales that year. You had The Last Historical Story, The Shadow of the Vulture, and the last issue of Magic Carpet. You had the last boxing stories appear in Jack Dempsey's Fight magazine. And on the other hand, you had first El Barak, first Breckenridge Elkins. Conan was really hitting his stride, so the year just had everything.
Add to that he had a car, so he started traveling a lot.
And did he buy that year? I mean, it was...
No, I think it was earlier. I forget if it was 1932 or 33, but if you read the letters he sent to Lovecraft, there's all those long descriptions. Oh, last week I went, he would drive 1,000 miles in 5 days, and he would do that a lot. So people had this idea of, oh yeah, he was always in crossplane. That's simply not true by beginning 1932, 1933, whenever he got that car.
And that's really interesting. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about his life, his normal life, his regular life. Anybody on the panel want to talk a little bit about what was his daily life like here in 1934? What was he doing besides writing?
Who knows?
Well,
when you read the letters to Lovecraft, you have this feeling that he was very much a member of the community, and I think that's mostly bullshit on my French.
okay.
How many hours a day was he writing?
I guess a lot. I guess he was writing, he could write in spurts, 18 hours a day and then don't do anything for 3 weeks, depending on his mood.
Was he as active at this point in his life in the community with regard to things like the American Legion, for instance, the fight stuff that he was trying to organize? Was there any mention in the letters of civic type work like that?
Not that I can recall.
No, so he was pretty much focused on his profession at this time.
After 1928, he started being part of the community, really. He was by himself. He made sure that no one would bother him, and his parents did the same. They tried to shelter him from crossplanes, really. And no one liked him here.
And that's a really sad state of affairs when you think about it. In 1934, with regard to relationships, I'd like to circle back to Noblin, but also some of his friends. When you watch or when you read the letters, the progression of who he's speaking to, changes. The folks the amateur writers, for instance, earlier that he had created the junta with, who was he communicating with in 1934? Besides Lovecraft, we can talk about him in a moment, but anybody else of note that we should know about?
Am I supposed to answer all the questions? Yeah. I don't know if that's true, actually, because yes, he was writing to August Derleth, to Clark Ashton Smith, but then again, why would you write to your friend in Brownwood when you have a car to visit with them?
That is a great point. And it was one of the things that I had wanted to ask before, because it did seem like he was building a creative fort around himself at this time.
But those Clark Ashton Smith letters, a lot of them are not dated. Was that correspondence in 1934? Was the majority of it in 1934?
33 to 35, yeah.
So, Chuck, one of the things, when you were doing your research for this panel, what stuck out to you about 1934 and Robert E. Howard that you'd like to share?
Well, just the variety of his fiction that was appearing, and like the attention he was starting to garner from the Weird Tales readers.
And when you say the variety, we're talking different genres, right?
Genres and characters. I mean, the El Barak, and Breckenridge Elkins, and not to mention the fact that he was writing some things that would not appear until later on. Like at the tail end of the year, he mentions having sold Beyond the Black River, which would appear in 1935, and he also wrote Pigeons from Hell in that year, which was published posthumously. And you see a lot of themes like crop up in both. Like he was doing his Piney Woods fiction, but he was always also doing starting the Pictish saga, with Beyond the Black River, and you do see things. They have certain elements in common, like, the piney woods in the Pictish wilderness, like, you find, like witches and, werebeasts of various sorts.
Where do you think was he getting inspiration from someone or somewhere at that time to get these ideas?
Well, it might have just gelled in his imagination, like, with me, like a lot of like things, like they tend to like really like germinate over time.
So,
Oh,
Go ahead, Jason.
yeah, I was just maybe broaden the scope real quick. 1934 was this very anxiety-producing year, geopolitically. Like you have the Nazis and the Night of Long Knives in June in 1934. You have Franco in Spain. You have Mussolini in Italy. Like there's a lot of and believe it or not, FDR was just elected, but that was a very contentious election. And you have people like Huey Long. I don't know if you guys know who Huey Long is, the share of wealth. Like there's this sense in the Western world that like the kettle is boiling. We used to believe we were going to be able to solve all of our problems through discussion and this kind of, basically post-World War I, like this, we're going to make war illegal, right? We're not going to fight anymore. Clearly that's not the case, so like I think that's part of the soup that goes into this year. I mean, when I read Valley of the Worm, there's that scene, I don't know if you guys have read that story, but where he's describing true battle, at one point like a child is gnawing on a leg or something. There's like a little baby that's been trained. So even our children were in the fight. I think there's something going on with this year where, Robert E. Howard had something to say about civilization and barbarism. I know we're not going to talk about Conan all the time, but he did have something to say about this there's this facade, and I think that this a lot of these kind of threads, everything was coming into focus, and so a lot of times, if you ask a writer, where your influence is from, like maybe they can't say, right, but they're part of that same soup. It's in the air, basically. So.
I remember that scene very vividly from Valley of the Worm. Like the actual line is something like, I have seen a babe sink its tiny teeth into the foot that was stamping out its life.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. In 1934, as Bill was saying earlier, people admired Bonnie and Clyde or Dillinger or the Outlaws, and we are the same in Conan. Is those people were able to survive in difficult times. So maybe they were not following the law, they were not actually. But before Bonnie and Clyde started killing people, everyone loved them. And if you think of Conan is that. He's a guy who's able to survive. He's not a conqueror by any means. He's a survivor. And if you read the Eerie, the reader's column in your tales, you have lots of readers who like Conan, also women who say, oh, I love Conan. He's a guy who's able to survive. So, of course, if you had this guy with you, well, you're going to survive the Depression.
So you're saying if he had written that kind of stuff later, it might not have gelled with the public?
I don't know. Who can tell?
Yeah, you mentioned the outlaws in the area. Like I remember, someone said of like John Dillinger, anyone who robs banks can't be all bad, because back then they were like foreclosing on everybody.
I guess it's no coincidence that fantasy in Conan, thinking of Conan here, was popular in the 1930s during the Depression era, and then the next time he was popular was in the mid-60s in the States, and then after 2001. So I think there is a thing to be said about the popularity of fantasy during times of crisis.
And certainly too, I think 1933, wasn't that a year, folks, that financially everyone was worried? I think you were mentioning earlier about the geopolitical ramifications on everyone and how it affected men, women, and children. But from a financial state, was he receiving funds that would relieve this at that time, that kind of pressure, or was he still feeling the same pressure that many others were?
I think, if I remember correctly, 1934 was his best year from a financial viewpoint. He got over 2,000. I think Indy was mentioning earlier that the average income was 3,000, something like that. But 2,000 for cross planes, I guess, is very good. there's this legend that says he was making more than the town's banker or something like that, which is completely apocryphal, but anyway, he was making lots of money for Cross Plains.
I don't know if this was related to 1934, but do you know how Robert E. Howard died?
How he died?
Yes.
We'll talk about that later.
Yep, later.
Oh my.
Yes, we do, and we can talk about that. Yes, we do, we can talk about that later, sure, no problem. So, trying to moderate the panel, I don't really have a ton of questions. I wasn't supposed to be the moderator, but I want to kind of keep the flow going, but also keep the theme weaving in and out.
You're doing great. You're doing fine.
Thanks, guys. Well, I do have a really interesting, I think it's, for me, an interesting question. His frame of mind, also. We're talking a little bit about how generally people feel, but in his letters, is there any indication of how he's feeling about these things that Jason was talking about, you, and everyone up here? Was there a sense of, was he developing a sense of who he was in relation to everyone around him with this new feeling of professionalism as a writer?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Patrice, but I believe there is some concern about going to war. Like, he doesn't come out and say, I'm afraid of there's going to be another world war and I'm going to be killed, but I can't think of the specific passages, but there's a couple of 1934 statements where he's like, when the next war happens, I'm just going to be gristle for the mill.
Yeah, there's also poems too, it was written before, but little,
Right.
yeah.
In 1932, yeah, 2
Okay,
years
yeah.
before, yeah.
So there really was, Jason, I think a sense of that fear impending, and I think it does show in some of his work.
Well, you see lots of concern about the average guy, about the farmers. When you read Out of the Dragon, you have this whole chapter, it's all about the peasants, the farmers that lost everything. It was very present with him. So yes, he was very aware of the economic pressure around him.
And that story is 1934, right? Where that
Out of the Dragon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's really the first time that he was given free rein to actually write something that was beyond either a serialized publication or a short story, correct? Was there any hope on his part expressed in writing that he was going to become a novelist in addition?
So the story begins in 1933. In 1933, he learns that an English publisher might be interested in publishing a collection of stories. So what he does, he gets his rights back from Weird Tales, sends 9 stories to England. Publisher replies, said, oh, that's interesting, but we're not going to publish short stories. If on the other hand, you can send us a novel, just that kind of story, we would definitely be interested in publishing it. So we are in early 1934, and so he starts to write a Conan story. He wrote Almeric, which was this novel which he decided to abandon, and then he writes Howard Dragon, in which you can find lots of stuff from earlier Conan stories. And he sends that to England, and he's very confident about it. Problem is, the company went under, which is why, after a year and a half, the story was eventually published in Weird Tales.
The construction of that story, though, was it intended as a novel, or did he piece it together from other concepts?
Oh, it was intended as a novel.
Okay.
Absolutely. We have a 3-page synopsis for it, and it's the usual Bob Harms synopsis. It's very detailed at the beginning, and then it gets very loose on the 3rd page.
Yeah, okay. Can we circle back around again, once again, to novel? Because I think it is is really a pillar, really, of his life at that time, her relationship with him. Anyone want to speak to how that relationship was viewed from outside, considering your comments earlier that he was not the most popular guy in town?
Well, one thing to say about that relationship is that professional writing was part of it, and she wanted to be a writer. He had this reputation of being a writer. This idea of being a professional writer, from a specific historical perspective, was kind of a new thing. Like this idea that you were like this is your job and not just something that you do on the side. Like this is a 1920s, 1930s thing, and so he's a successful writer, and she wants to also be a successful writer, like a professional. So I think that's an interesting 1934. In the context of this conversation, it seems appropriate.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Imagine everyone in town thinks you're the town freak, really, and people see you in the street shadowboxing, and no one understands that you're making a living selling stories. It's not a real job. And then one day you get this woman, she shows up and she says, oh, I want to be with you. I'm not date yet for that, of course, after, but eventually, very quickly, they become an item. So imagine this guy in town, no one likes him, and this girl, she said, oh, I want to be with you. Imagine the boost on the morale of the guy.
And that's the thing I wanted to focus on real quick, is this idea that he's on this side of that popularity paradigm, but she's on the other side, isn't she? She's from a respected family. She's herself a school teacher. She's really kind of like a pillar of the community, young, blossoming woman who has a lot going for her, and I'm certain she was viewed in a positive way. How were there pressures that they felt? Were there pressures that they felt as a couple in town?
I don't know. Well, we only have what she wrote to know about that. And one thing I like about her book, there's this one scene when she's at school for the first day, and there's a superintendent. He was called Nat Williams, and he was there, and he was giving them, this is what you can do, what you cannot do. And she, at some point, she's like, I've never wanted to smoke a cigarette more in my life. And I guess that tells us who she was. And so she was a strong woman, so of course he would be attracted to her because she was not, the average woman across plains, I guess.
Okay. You know what? I see a bunch of hands are raised, so let's go to some questions. I'm going to go with Indy real quick.
Tomorrow we are doing a panel on Novelyn Price's influence on the writing of Robert E. Howard.
None. I can answer that. So the panel is over tomorrow.
And I'm
going to be on that panel with Bill. It's going to be fun.
Just for real brief purposes here. Patrice likes this one, and I do too. But Novelyn was, in 1934, she became an influence on his writing, and probably most prominently, Novelyn maybe was Valeria when Howard wrote Red Nails. Mm-hmm. So I'm just throwing that out there in the context of.
What do you think of that, Chuck?
I hadn't thought of that. Like, I know she crops up in one of the spicy stories. This was after the, bad breakup. But there was one of the Wild Bill Clinton spicy stories where it has this school teacher character.
Daughters of Feud.
Yeah.
That's the one. Oh, we're going to be talking about that tomorrow.
No,
Bill.
not that one. It was like...
She's a school teacher.
Yeah.
In that story.
That's just called Miss Augusta Evans.
Yes, that's the one.
Oh, okay.
Daughters of Feud. There's a spanking scene in that. Yeah. You need to come back tomorrow. It's going to be fun. We'll have photos.
So, yeah, we definitely come back tomorrow for all of that. Sir, you had a question.
Yeah, you had mentioned the movie, and I just saw it, so it's still fresh in my mind. But I'm wondering, this is all that movie was based on her memoirs. So is that all we have as far as any kind of indication of the relationship? Did Robert write anything about it? Was there anything that we have on his side of the whole story? Because it sounds like it's all one-sided.
Yeah, one-sided, really. There's just a few mentions in the correspondence. At some point he says to Lovecraft, oh yeah, I have rekindled and put an end to an old love story or something like that. Very concise. So he didn't say anything to anyone.
So really the only image we have of that relationship is her perspective. We don't have anything on from his
Correct.
side. Okay.
So let's turn over to some questions to the general audience. I saw a hand in the back. And if you can stand up and go ahead and ask your question. Whoever it will.
Okay, sorry. You talked about the economics in 1934, and I know that the general depression was going on. But how was the boom of the oil industry going on in Crosslands at the time? Was that more or less affected by the depression?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking it was in 34. It was declining here. Like the oil boom was like 3 years past at this point.
Well, I guess it's more than that.
It had pretty well died out in 34.
Oh,
Yeah, if you read the Crossman's review from the 1920s, and you see that every week or other week you have, oh, a new well, whatever. 1930s, you don't have that anymore.
And with that went some of the economic surplus that the town was enjoying, as well as probably some jobs.
Yeah.
So some of that pressure we talked about earlier could have been from outward influences and then directed at Howard and her relationship.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that Howard like really hated the oil industry and pretty much everything connected with it. He was sort of similar. If you ever saw the movie Giant, Rock Hudson's character played a Texan, and he resented the oil industry because he thought it was like ruining Texas. And Howard felt pretty much the same way.
Just going off of what you said, what about like his Albarak stories kind of play into that as well? About his hate for like how oil industries destroy landscapes and people.
Well, the Albarak stories, we see one of his big personality traits was like sympathy for the underdog. So he always had, Albarak, he's like sort of siding with these like, barbaric natives who were being like trampled roughshod under the, the big European powers and, the Great Game and, Britain and Russia.
I want to jump on that, the Great Game, like this idea of moving pawns on the board, and you're the pawn. There's this figure of the people of the Black Circle. They like live in the mountain and they're above us all and they're mysterious and you don't know what they're doing. There were a lot of like, the New Deal was happening, right? These are like big decisions that are being made by a small group of people about a lot of stuff, right? Like this is a new thing, like this macroeconomic. Like in the United States, we didn't do that. We didn't do these big organized economy things, right? Like if there's an economist in the room, they could maybe make a better case than I am. But this was like a radical move away from like the previous American economy. The New Deal was like, this almost Soviet style. Like that's an overstatement, but it was it was an organized economy, which hitherto it wasn't as organized. And you have the SEC that's being established in 1934. But if you squint, you can see these black seers of Yimsha. Did I say that correct? They're kind of up there puppeting us and treating and moving us like pawns. And also in the Scarlet Citadel the same year, 1934, you have I can't say his name.
Zotalanti? That's 1932.
Oh, is it 1932?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Well, there's the recurring trope of the sorcerer. Probably not fair to say it's a 1934 thing, but this idea of like an elite, right? Just kind of controlling you. I think it's part of the 34.
Like yes, the world has changed since.
Yeah, talking about the world changing, I've made the point now and then that Howard wrote for readers whose world had been rocked by cataclysm, just like Conan's world had been upset by cataclysm. 1906, the year Howard was born, the world was ruled by kings, emperors, sultans, kaisers, and czars. And 20 years later, they were all gone. In fact, a picture like just how different the world was during Howard's boyhood. He was born in 1906. Remember, like the Wild Bunch takes place in South Texas around like 1914. So the world was like a very different place, and I think it had a lot to do with his vision of like civilization crumbling before tides of barbarism. Don Hare made this point in the Hard-Boiled Heroic Fantasists. You had the rise of fascism in Europe, gangsters in America. You had the big crime wave that year with Dillinger and Bonnie and Clyde and everybody. So yeah, that would have affected his outlook. I mean, the Gilded Age was long gone. Manifest Destiny, that was done.
And the speed at which people and Robert E. Howard would learn of these events increased exponentially, right? So people were reacting almost in real time versus just 15 to 20 years prior when we waited for the newspaper. Now you have the radio, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, the world had changed like greatly in like the previous 50 years. Like somebody made the point, like in 1930, the Wild West would have been no more remote to him than like Vietnam and Watergate are to us. So he was able to talk with the old timers.
And he did, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I got more questions. This gentleman right here, and then we'll get to you next, okay?
Do we have any, I guess, kind of touching on Conan as an existentialist and within the conditions that he was sort of writing in 1934, like with the geopolitical kind of sort of instability and this kind of anxiety around all of that, do we know from his letters or his library, did he have any sort of structured philosophical reading that he had done previously? Had he touched on sort of the advent of like, Kierkegaard and the Marx and all that, into that kind of analysis? Or do we think that this was sort of just like the intuitive experience of the time?
He had done some reading in philosophy. He mentions he had at least a nodding acquaintance with Nietzsche, Kant. I think he mentions Spinoza. Schopenhauer, yeah.
But that was late 1920s. After that,
yeah, but he was familiar with like the philosophers.
The gentleman in the back, and we'll get to you next, sir.
I was wondering, you mentioned, I believe, that Beyond the Black River was named during this year as well.
mm-hmm.
I was wondering, I thought, that really speaks to like the kind of anxieties about war, because notably, Beyond the Black River is that they lose at the end of the story. Velitrium is raised, and they can't go beyond the Black River anymore.
Why don't you flesh out that question a little bit and make it more like a question? Because I think I know where you're going.
Yeah. I was wondering if it kind of, if you thought that really like played into like how the kind of Beyond the Black River was kind of like made.
So how it was formed and how the story was formed.
It
If
was,
those
like,
are
formed, and you thought a lot of those like anxieties of that specific year, came into the story.
There's a Schopenhauer. There's a I want to turn his name into an adjective. Schopenhauerian. I can't say. There's a cynicism in that story. It's about a defeat, and I think that the West had this sense that defeat was nigh, and defeat wasn't that we were going to be defeated in the war. I think read your history books. There really wasn't a concern that the Western economy was ever going to be like, fascism wasn't going to win if we got our stuff together, right? But going to war was the loss, right? The fact that we couldn't solve it in a non-violent way, like, I guess that World War I that we fought, it didn't end all war. We're going to have to, we have to finish this thing, and then there was a lot of, I don't know if that makes any sense. There's this, I'm agreeing with you that, like, the boundaries of civilization being pushed back,
It's like a direct hit on the Enlightenment, right? I mean, the ideals that fueled us at the time, right? I mean, it's a loss in the sense that we had to discard that to preserve it.
Yes, exactly. He said he wanted to write about the hardships of the average people in that story.
And these are all good examples.
In reference to the last question, you have to remember Howard was within living memory of the Comanche Wars and of the Civil War, when the Comanche frontier withdrew from this part of Texas east of Fort Worth. So he had a living remembrance of the losses that war brought to this frontier during the Comanche Wars.
Yeah, that's a great point. And they could serve, and this is just speculation on my part, not part of the panel, but it really could serve as a jumping off point for somebody, for this particular story that this gentleman asked about. You had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to push back a little bit about the global fears of 1934. It was actually a pretty mellow year. Franco's 36. Hitler hasn't invaded anybody yet. The anti-war movement in the United States is super strong. We have the Nye Committee basically saying that World War I was all because the bankers forced us to go to war. So that fear of war is there, but I don't think we should make a big deal guessing that World War II is going to come. I wonder if for me, that this whole fear of the economy collapsing, and I'm assuming besides oil, this area is big agriculturally at the time, and we've got the AAA doing the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which is a very weirdly capitalistic way of handling the problem, which is killing baby pigs so that the price of pork goes up. I'm wondering how that type of government intervention plays a role. You've touched, all three of you touched on this a little bit, and I wonder if you could go into a little bit more detail about, is this the civilization that he fears interfering, or is the civilization he fears the oil people coming up and these boom towns causing disaster in the area?
He was certainly opposing the intervention of Wall Street, as he wrote in Texas Life. So he didn't like the guys coming from the east to take over the land, be it oil or business or whatever.
And, you seem like you know a lot more about 1934 than I do, but regarding, was there this kind of ambient sense of a fear of war? I'm interested to talk more about this, because I think maybe there was, but if anything, there was this sense of factions were consolidating that were interminable, because you have like unions organizing, like there's a the labor movement is really getting powerful, and they're at odds with the you have the strike breakers going on. You have it seems like a lot of people were entrenching themselves. So if it's not a fear of war, it's that there are sides, there are lines that are being drawn, and this is going to end in some sort of the tension has to resolve itself in some way.
So class warfare more than.
Oh, class warfare. That's
so what are they entrenching specifically? Against?
I'm pretty. I don't know my labor history, but in 1934 there were a lot of like major.
I think we had the first sit-down strike then, right? 34.
Yeah.
It might be 36. I'm a foreign relations guy, so
okay.
Domestic stuff is always a little extra.
I think I had a note here about it. There was a. I don't want to talk about something I don't know about, but I'm pretty sure there was a major union that consolidated in 1934. But I'll shut up because I want to say something.
So the last thing on this point, maybe is there anything that stands out in his work that would be what you think is a direct reflection of some of these fears or even these movements? Because I know that Howard the Dragon has. Oh, you got one?
Well, yeah, that's one. It's not from 1934, but 1933. It's a modern Western called Wild Water, and it deals with that, especially in a very efficient way, to my mind. So it's a story about a guy who goes crazy, and it takes place in this region near Lake Brownwood.
Can I say one thing? So the reason why I'm so interested in how Howard's work kind of reflects or refracts what's going on in history at the time is because I'm a professor, and literary historians, they often will make value judgments about who's worth reading versus who's not worth reading, because some writers are actually tuned into the moment and they can teach us about the moment, but these fantasy writers, they clearly aren't really concerned with the real world, they're just concerned with, this fantasy stuff. Does that make sense? And so what I'm pushing back and saying that actually if you read Howard's work closely, it seems like it's really in conversation with what's going on in 1934. It's sorcerers and thralls, right? It's wars in kingdoms. It's not fascism and labor movements, but it's actually, if you squint, there's this relationship that I can't really articulate right now that is important, and I think that's why we need to read Howard.
Yet another thing that separates Howard from the rest, huh? Indy.
Well, in 1934, I believe, Howard had bought a car, and he started traveling all through the Southwest here, down to Mexico, and he went into a lot of places, a lot of different communities. How did that impact his writing? Is there, what was the influence of his traveling on what he was writing?
So he would listen to old timers, and that's something Noveline talked about. She said, he would love to listen to the people he would meet on the wherever they would be. There's one direct example is when he goes to the Carlsbad Caverns in 1934, and 1 month later he writes the Thief of the Wallower, the Conan story, which takes place in an environment that's very close to what he saw, and as the way he described it to Lovecraft, it's obviously taken from that trip to the Carlsbad Caverns.
So we'll get some more questions. Sir?
So what's the furthest distance that Howard traveled from Cross Plains once he had his car?
That's a tricky one because sometimes he would travel 1,000 miles in 5 days. So he would go, so it would not be a straight road to somewhere. He went to as far as to Santa Fe.
Yeah, he went. I've been prowling around trying to figure out exactly where he was. I think I know, but
You should know.
Very, very near where present-day Los Alamos is today. We know that for sure.
So that would be the farthest, right?
We're
talking about
like a straight shot, like a trip, yeah. Because he meandered all the way through New Mexico from Carlsbad Cameron up. He went to see the Billy the Kid memorials, things like that. So yeah,
Yeah, and there's a letter to Lovecraft I was reading recently. They said, I was gone for 5 days, and so he described the trip, and he just goes. It was 1,200 miles. Imagine that in a car in 1931, 33, sorry, on those roads. Yeah.
What was the closest Lovecraft and Howard ever got to possibly meeting up? Did they ever talk about it?
Louisiana.
In
New
Louisiana.
Orleans. Yeah, New Orleans. Lovecraft was in New Orleans. Howard couldn't get to him because his car was broken down, I think.
Because he didn't have any money. He didn't have a car.
Yeah.
So I guess that's one of the main reasons he got a car, so that next time he could go and meet Lovecraft, which never happened.
So close. Yes, sir.
You guys are saying that he didn't get along, the townspeople didn't like him, but now you also say that he enjoyed listening to all the stories of the old timers. If they didn't like him, why were they going to bother talking to him?
What's that?
I didn't get any of that.
Okay, so what he's asking is, from his perspective, it appears that there's two reactions to Howard. You described, yeah. So what's the difference between the townsfolk and the old timers and their reaction to him?
I would guess that the people from Crosslands knew him, and so they already have a preconceived idea as to who he was. So if he was going to somewhere else, no one would know about him, so he would ask them questions. I mean, just read Northern's book; it's all in there.
So I would add though that there's a distinction made, and I'm not on the panel anymore. But the old timers are not in town. Okay, so these are folks that are outside, and he's meeting them on a one-on-one basis, and he's literally stopping his car on the side of the road and talking to someone who's willing to talk back. It's not somebody who's walking and shadowboxing past the barbershop, for instance. Nothing like that. It's a little bit different. And he may have had those conversations in town. And in fact, I think he did. But I don't want to speculate on this panel.
There are passages in Evelyn's book where she says that Howard's antagonism towards the people of Cross Plains was often like something he put on. So I wonder, like, how much, like, are we perpetuating this myth of Howard being an outsider in town when really he was just people like that? She said everybody was nice to him, but then he would call them his enemies. That they would. Well, there was a disconnect between how he talked about them and the way they interacted with them. Maybe they were just smiling, meanwhile they didn't like him. Or was he just kind of, he is a writer, was he just creating a myth of himself as being this outsider?
I've been trying not to get involved in this.
Come on up.
My aunt, Ruth Baum, there's stories written about that he went to the Methodist Church because he wanted to be close to her. But actually, the story of Ruth Baum, and I asked her personally before she died about this. She lived right across the street. My dad and my aunt. My aunt was 3 months older than Robert Howard when he moved in, when they came together. She said they were very good friends. They never did have a relationship at all. And she said from his, see, my wife's trying to tell me I'm not supposed to be doing this. She said that he was a very nice guy. And that all these stories that had heard, she said, I didn't see that. Said we were friends until the time I married and even after that. And said, I didn't see that relationship with Cross Plains. Now, that doesn't mean it wasn't there, but it does kind of go along with, how, was he making up a story about that, or insecurity or whatever and everything. She had very high appreciation. My dad died before I even knew Robert Howard had existed. And so I didn't get to talk to him. My mother perpetuated stories that I think a lot of times came from Jack Scott, which I'm named after. So anyway, I know the people that were associated with him real well. And the one I asked that I know very personally after the fact had a different story. But that doesn't mean it's the right story. That's just to give some context.
Thank you, Jack. And then, you know, I'll piggyback on that because my wife and I were taken by Roland Jones, a person that lives here in Cross Plains, to interview someone who wanted to be interviewed. And myself, Leo Grin, and a few others went. And her recollection, she was alive when she's gone now, but she was alive and worked at the bank. And you know, Robert E. Howard, from her perspective, was not viewed, much like you said, not viewed as negatively. Certainly, she said she thought he was strange. Her husband thought he was strange, but they gathered around to listen to boxing, for instance, or news events on a radio. And he was amongst those folks, and he was a very pleasant person, according to her. He would come in, get his checks. Imagine sending letters back and forth. She didn't know him like best friends or anything like that. It wasn't like that. This is a person that was in the community that she knew. And this is anecdotal. This is her response. I had this on tape, and she was anything but dismissive of him. She thought he was strange, and she said that her husband thought he was a bit strange, but that's what writers do, she said, and she laughed. It wasn't genuine, like, oh, you love that Robert E. Howard guy, but it was more of a, yeah, I know that guy, he's a very polite man, a little strange. That was one person's perspective, though, not an out-of-work peer. It's a different set of people.
He's also not from here, right? He moved here.
Correct.
Right.
They arrived in 1990.
Yeah, because I mean, I lived in the same town for 24 years. I'm never going to be a local. So I wonder how much of that plays a part, that you're in the community but you're not considered a local.
Speak about that, Howard. Well, the thing is his dad was a doctor, and he was very much appreciated. He was voted the town's favorite whatever personality of 1935. So he was very much appreciated by everyone here. So his dad and him are two distinct cases, really. It's not about the family thing, really, or being a newcomer.
We're rubbing up right against the time that this is going to end. Are there any questions that you'd like to ask of this panel before we conclude? Yeah.
I'm assuming his mother's health was okay in *34, or was it bad? Was there turmoil?
It was the beginning and the end. She had to go to Temple in early 1935 to get her gallbladder removed. So she was, I guess, okay as far as we can tell. But she was not an invalid because nobody in Price doesn't mention that she's in bed or she's still valid. But a few weeks after that, it was all over, really.
Well, it looks like 1934 was quite a year for Robert E. Howard professionally. We know that. There's a lot going on in the world. I hope that you learned something from these discussions today. I really. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, not my question, her question.
Oh, go ahead. Who wants to take that one?
What's that about?
So she had a question. She would like to know how.
Oh, the death of Robert E. Howard?
Yes.
Okay, unfortunately, Robert E. Howard ended his life by suicide. He had suffered from chronic depression throughout his life. It would have been treatable with modern antidepressant medications, but it just wasn't available back then. It's not like Doc Howard could write a prescription for Prozac for him. And he suffered from that throughout his life. And towards the end, everything started going wrong for him. He had broken up with Northern Price. He wasn't getting paid by Weird Tales.
Could have tried.
Which they forced him to write some other things he wasn't quite so hot about. And also he was a caregiver for a sick elderly person, which if you've ever done it, it's very demanding. I mean, he toward the end, he was not known to get much sleep. He was drinking lots of coffee, which he didn't ordinarily drink. You know, which if you're a non-coffee drinker and you drink a lot of coffee just to stay awake, it can sort of mess with you, you know, if you're not used to it. And also, he was writing these funny westerns and these spicy stories for the spicy pulps. So basically, you know, the one-time author of the Shadow Kingdom and Swords of the Thunder was now writing, comedies and softcore porn. So it was like a perfect storm. Like all these things contributed into undermining his mental state.
Thank you. So, like everybody give a hearty thank you to Thank you for attending.